It begins in a quiet Queens household, where the echoes of laughter from the theme "Those Were the Days" fade into a familiar domestic tension between Gloria and Michael, a young couple caught between idealism and responsibility. Gloria suspects she's pregnant, and the news sets off a chain reaction of fear denial and moral questioning. While her mother Edith rejoices at the possibility of a new grandchild, Gloria's hesitation reveals the deeper conflict of an era between the joy of motherhood and the anxiety of an overpopulated, uncertain world. When she confides in her husband, Michael reacts with anger masked as logic. They once promised to stop at one child, not just because of money, but out of guilt toward a suffering planet. Yet here she stands, perhaps pregnant, and he, a self-proclaimed liberal, must now face the hypocrisy of his own principles. Their argument escalates from contraception to philosophy, from love to control, until the fight lands on one absurd but symbolic solution, a vasectomy. Gloria demands that Michael take responsibility to do something for a change, while he, terrified of emasculation, hides behind intellectual justifications. What begins as a domestic spat becomes a satire of gender roles, moral posturing, and the politics of bodily autonomy in the 1,970 seconds. The script's humor never conceals its raw truth, how idealism collapses under the weight of fear. The comedic back and forth, "You didn't take the pill. One night is all it takes," exposes the fragility of love when principles meet biology. When Gloria calls the doctor and actually books the surgery, Michael panics, realizing how his liberal talk now has real-world consequences. The clinic scene turns into a surreal dance of masculinity and medicine. The young doctor casually jokes, "Let's boogie," while preparing the tools of sterilization. Mike, anxious and sweating, becomes a metaphor for the male ego under the knife of progress. The irony peaks when he finally goes through with it, only for Gloria to discover that she's not pregnant after all. The reversal is cruelly poetic. He sacrifices fertility for a child that never was, yet the act frees him spiritually. When he returns home, he feels liberated, even proud, finally living the ideals he preaches. Gloria, however, feels guilt. She made him do something irreversible. Their reconciliation scene captures the essence of All in the Family, the quiet, absurd tenderness of flawed people trying to love in a world changing too fast. The Christmas episode follows shifting tone but continuing the show's moral exploration. Archie, Edith, and the family host Christmas Eve dinner with unexpected guests. David, an old friend of Michael's, who turns out to be a draft dodger hiding in Canada. The arrival of this young man turns the dinner table into a battlefield of ideology. Archie, the conservative patriarch, represents the old America, proud, patriotic, and suspicious of change. Michael and Gloria stand for the new generation, questioning war authority and blind nationalism. As the dinner progresses, jokes give way to revelation. David admits he fled to Canada to avoid fighting in Vietnam. The room freezes. Archie's fury erupts, calling him a traitor, a coward, a disgrace to the country. Yet Pinky Peterson, a family friend whose own son died in Vietnam, silences everyone with calm wisdom. He says that both his son and David acted according to their conscience, and that if his son were alive, he'd want to share Christmas dinner with David. The table softens. Even Archie, though stubborn, begins to crumble under the weight of empathy. In that moment, the series transcends comedy. It becomes a reflection on grief, forgiveness, and the meaning of patriotism. The scene of shared silence, broken only by carolers outside, is one of television's most haunting moral portraits of post-war America. The third story shifts again, this time into farce and reflection. Archie and Edith miss their bus trip to New Jersey for Aunt Iola's 90th birthday. Their misadventure at the bus station turns into a portrait of aging marriage and confusion. Their naive attempts to manage travel logistics, mixed with Edith's endless kindness, contrast with Archie's irritable cynicism. Missing the bus forces them back home, where they inadvertently interrupt a romantic evening between their tenant Teresa and her boyfriend. What could have been scandal becomes comic misunderstanding, yet underneath lies a moral question about generational difference, how the boundaries of love and propriety have changed. Archie's blunt conservatism clashes with the young couple's innocence, and Edith, ever the gentle mediator, stands between tradition and change, embodying forgiveness and empathy. The final segment brings the theme of attachment and memory to the forefront with the Archie's Chair episode. When Edith accidentally breaks Archie's beloved armchair, his throne, his symbol of power, the household spirals into chaos. The chair, worn and beer-stained, becomes a sacred relic of his identity. When the chair disappears after being sent for repair, Archie rages, mourning it like a fallen comrade. Yet the absurd twist reveals that the chair has been sold to an art gallery where a modern artist has turned it into an installation, a symbol of working-class authenticity, a relic of America's domestic past. The episode brilliantly satirizes the clash between art and reality, value and sentimentality. When Archie finds his chair displayed as American Gothic, he doesn't see art, he sees theft. His confrontation with the artist Elvin Lichtenraus becomes a statement about class division. To the elite, the chair is a metaphor. To Archie, it's home. When the artist dealer offers him $250, then $300 to let it stay as art, Archie hesitates. The scene transforms into a philosophical parable. What is worth more, the cultural symbol or the personal memory? Ultimately, Archie's stubborn loyalty wins. He chooses sentiment over money, reclaiming the chair as his own, as though reclaiming his dignity from a world that no longer understands him. The final image, Archie sitting proudly once more in the old chair, feels both comic and tragic. It is a return to the past, a denial of time, and yet a small triumph of love. Across these episodes, the tone moves fluidly between laughter and lamentation. The pregnancy scare becomes a meditation on freedom. The Christmas dinner, a discourse on moral courage. The missed bus, a tale of aging and love. And the broken chair, a poem about belonging. Together they form a mosaic of American life, confused, contradictory, compassionate. All in the Family exposes not only the clash of ideologies, but the beauty of imperfection, the humanity in frustration, and the comedy in tragedy. Beneath Archie's ignorance and Michael's arrogance lies the same longing to be right, to be loved, to find meaning in a world spinning beyond their control. Each argument, each misunderstanding, each reconciliation becomes a mirror of the nation itself, a family arguing over what America means. The laughter echoes, but it is never empty. It is the laughter of survival. The rhythm of family life resumes in Queens, but the echo of that broken chair lingers like a metaphor for everything fragile in the bunker universe. Archie's return to his seat symbolizes the restoration of order, yet it is a fragile order, one built on denial and nostalgia. The chair episode ends with him seated in victory, but the silent glances from Edith and Gloria reveal something deeper. They know he hasn't just reclaimed furniture. He's reclaimed a sense of control in a world where everything else politics. Gender society is slipping from his grasp. Archie's world is shrinking, yet his stubbornness becomes his last act of resistance against time. The humor of All in the Family works because it is soaked in melancholy. Laughter hides a fear that tomorrow's world won't need men like him anymore. His throne, cracked and stained, becomes his fortress against irrelevance. As the following episodes unfold, we see the aftermath of that illusion of control crumble in everyday conversations. The generational friction between Archie and Mike evolves from political debate to something more existential, the struggle over meaning. Mike, now jobless and burdened by his own intellectual pride, finds himself defeated by the very ideals he once preached. He and Gloria face financial instability, and their dream of a better world shrinks into arguments about bills and diapers. Their utopian visions about justice and progress dissolve into the chaos of domestic fatigue. Archie watches them with a mixture of scorn and pity, as though seeing his own youthful idealism mocked by time. Yet beneath his insults lies a quiet recognition that he and Mike are trapped in the same cycle men raised to believe in control, now learning that life refuses to obey them. One evening, over cold meatloaf and a flickering TV set, they share a rare silence, broken only by Archie muttering, "You think you got it all figured out, meathead, but you don't know nothing about living till you've lost something. You can't fix." It is a line that lands like an accidental poem, crude, defensive, yet full of truth. Edith, ever the quiet soul of the house, becomes the emotional spine of these stories. While Archie clings to his chair and his pride, she clings to gentleness, the last unbroken thing in their world. Her scenes shimmer with quiet power, the way she listens, the way she forgives, the way she fills silence with warmth. The series never portrays her as foolish. It portrays her as the wisdom that comes from compassion. When Gloria breaks down over her guilt about the vasectomy incident, Edith simply says, "People do what they think is right at the time, and that's all any of us can do." It's not a political statement, it's survival wisdom. In that moment, Edith transcends all ideological noise and becomes the conscience of the entire household. Even Archie, in his gruff way, depends on her serenity to make sense of a world that confuses him. When she laughs, the chaos feels smaller. When she cries, the whole show becomes a prayer for understanding. The brilliance of All in the Family lies in this paradox, the constant collision between laughter and sorrow, ignorance and tenderness, cruelty and love. Its comedy disarms us, but beneath it lies a meticulous social anatomy of America in transition. Every argument in that living room is America arguing with itself about gender, race, patriotism, morality, and the loss of certainty. The Christmas dinner episode remains one of its most profound meditations on the cost of principle. The draft dodger's presence at the table forces each character to confront their own hypocrisy. Archie's patriotism is sincere but blind. Mike's liberalism is sharp but self-righteous. Pinky's grief is raw but redemptive. When he says he would share Christmas with the man who refused to fight in the same war that killed his son, the series captures the essence of moral courage, the ability to forgive in the face of pain. No speech from Mike could ever equal the quiet dignity of that moment. It's not intellect, but empathy that redeems the scene. After dinner, when the carolers sing outside, Archie stands by the door unsure whether to join them or shut them out. That hesitation, that single undecided gesture, becomes the whole philosophy of All in the Family. Archie doesn't change completely, he rarely does, but he is haunted by small awakenings. He begins to sense that decency might come from people he once despised. The show never mocks him cruelly. It lets him be human, trapped by his era, yet capable of flickers of grace. In one of the later scenes, we find Archie and Edith at the bus station again, this time, waiting for another trip that never happens. The missed bus becomes a metaphor for all the chances they miss to understand each other, to see the world, to move beyond their narrow walls. Edith chatters about relatives and family, while Archie grumbles about money and schedules. But underneath the noise, there's love, the kind that survives through routine, not passion. When they realize they missed the last bus, Edith sighs. "Oh, Archie and Iola will be so disappointed." Archie grins. "Good, maybe she'll outlive me out of spite." That one-liner, absurd and tender, distills 40 years of marriage into one punchline. The show's humor is the realism of life itself, the way tragedy and affection share the same breath. The scene at home later that night is one of television's quiet masterpieces. The couple returns to an empty house, their tenant Teresa, in the middle of an awkward romantic encounter. Archie barges and misreads everything and reacts with comic outrage. Yet Edith's kindness turns embarrassment into humanity. Her advice to the young woman that love without respect is just confusion becomes another thread in the show's ongoing tapestry of moral reflection. What could have been slapstick becomes empathy disguised as comedy. Every storyline circles back to the theme of home, what it means to belong to, forgive, to survive one another. When Archie finally recovers his chair from the art gallery, the irony of modern art treating his old seat as a cultural artifact cuts deep. To him, it's not art, it's memory. It holds the sweat of his workdays, the smell of his beer, the shape of his life. To see it behind glass labeled the New American Gothic feels like watching himself turned into a joke by the very world that left him behind. Yet his confrontation with the artist becomes a strangely poetic scene about class and dignity. The young avant-garde sculptor, speaking in the detached language of modernism, calls the chair a commentary on post-industrial man's emotional dislocation. Archie answers, "The only thing dislocated is the spring that always poked me in the butt." That exchange, ridiculous and profound, captures everything the show ever tried to say about the American divide. How one man's art is another man's life. How the educated elite intellectualize what the working class lives through. The gallery scene becomes an accidental sermon about alienation. The man who created the chair's meaning doesn't understand it as deeply as the man who sat in it for 28 years. In the end, Archie's decision to reclaim the chair is not just stubbornness, it's an act of resistance. He refuses to let meaning be taken from him by people who interpret it from a distance. He might not understand the language of art, but he understands ownership, sentiment, and pride. The final image of him sitting back in that chair, triumphant yet exhausted, feels like an epitaph for a generation. A man who will not surrender his world, even as it disappears around him. The camera lingers on his face not as a hero, but as a relic, both tragic and beloved. That's the secret genius of All in the Family. It makes you laugh at the very things that make you ache. It exposes prejudice not by preaching, but by showing its roots in fear, loneliness, and love. Every insult hides insecurity. Every fight hides affection. The series is America arguing with itself at the dinner table over mashed potatoes and ideology. And yet, through all its chaos, it celebrates the stubborn, stumbling humanity that keeps families and nations alive. As the credits roll and the theme song returns, its cheerful melody feels different. Those Were the Days is no longer nostalgia. It's irony, mourning, and gratitude all at once. It reminds us that even in their ignorance and confusion, these characters are us trying, failing, laughing, and holding on. That is why decades later, the show still resonates, because every generation finds itself sitting in Archie's chair, arguing about what's right, what's fair, and what's next.